Tanks. Tanks are cool. Everybody loves seeing 50 tons of steel and firepower absolutely demolish the bad guys. But are your tanks living up to that expectation? Or are they the ones getting demolished by a mentally unstable pirate with a boomstick? Have no worries, because we're going to talk about some tank builds and tactics for every stage of Menace that will make sure using tanks and bipedal walkers, of course, is always a blast. So let's start with that early game grind, when you have very little supply and bringing along your troop carrier just seems way too expensive. Yes, it can be expensive, but in pretty much every early mission, it's worth it thanks to the fact that most early enemy squads have no way of countering it. Throw in a squad of your own that has a mobile infantry perk, and now your troop carrier becomes the ultimate early game weapon. So for an early game build, just grab the troop carrier, throw the starting machine gun on it, and load it with an infantry unit that has the mobile infantry perk at the start of each mission. Now you can roll up to enemy units, fire some suppression bursts from the machine gun to pin those enemy units down, and then unload your infantry to finish them off. I would recommend equipping your mobile infantry unit with submachine guns as soon as possible, as despite their somewhat lackluster looking stats, they will absolutely shred enemies within about 3 to 5 tiles of your squad. Equip armor-piercing ammo in one of your infantry squad's equipment slots, and now even armored enemies will be shred to pieces by your submachine guns. This build continues to work even later in the game, especially if your mobile squad can pick up perks like Berserk that refunds them AP when killing enemy units. With Berserk, your mobile squad can get 3 or 4 attacks and wipe out whole contingents of enemy forces before jumping back into the protective cover of their troop carrier. Also later on, I'd recommend adding an auto laser as a main weapon for your troop carrier, as you should be able to pick one up relatively early in the game. The auto laser is great for taking out early game enemy vehicles and decent at damaging heavy infantry too. Just remember that if you add anything bigger than a medium weapon to a troop carrier like a short-barreled tank gun or something like that, it loses the ability to carry troops. Now let's move into the mid-game and take a look at some more powerful vehicular options. Mid-game options can vary quite a bit depending on what kind of fire support you want, whether you've picked up the OCI upgrades that give you more supply, and the equipment you've been able to salvage from the battlefield or buy on the black market. Generally, I'd recommend a main gun focused on killing enemy hardware, as all the secondary weapons are focused more on suppressing infantry. I recommend the laser lance for a main, as this carried me through a large part of the game. As long as your pilot has decent accuracy, this weapon will destroy all light vehicles and most medium ones too. Only the heaviest tanks and walkers will survive a blast from the laser lance. Then for the secondary, you really can't beat the grenade launcher. This thing absolutely vaporizes any poorly armored units and still suppresses the heavier ones too. In fact, I'd recommend this as the light weapon to use on all your tank builds from the mid-game on. So that build would be more of your main battle tank build, but what about some more specialized builds now that we're in the mid-game and have more options? One specialized build could be long-range fire support, which can go 2 ways. Long-range artillery fire for suppression, or long-range indirect fire focused on tank killing. The rocket organ weapon you can loot from the pirates is a great suppression artillery, as it fires a large volley of rockets that, while very inaccurate, cover such a large area that any group of enemy squads will take significant suppression and even some decent damage from this volley of rockets. I like this option better than the actual vehicle mounted mortar you can pick up, because the wide AoE is almost guaranteed to hit something, especially in a group of units, versus the mortar cannon only really hitting in one spot. On the long-range tank killing side of things, a very cheap and effective option, at least for vehicles anyway, is to use a light walker equipped with an ATGM. Just make sure that you have a squad leader that either has the target designator item or the ability to mark targets from a perk. Once you mark a target, your ATGM toting light walker can hit that target with indirect fire even if it moves out of sight, so long as it's still within the range of the weapon. Of course, you will want to keep your walker well away from the front lines, as it will have no way of dealing with infantry, aside from running them over, of course. You can also do the same thing with a truck or the ATV, but I just like the aesthetic of the rocket launching walker. Finally, as we talked about earlier, you can still use the mobile infantry troop carrier combo in the mid-game too, At this point, your troop carrier could be using the grenade launcher light weapon and the laser lance for a main weapon, as it's considered a medium weapon still and will still let you carry your troops in your carrier. However, your troops can now be better equipped too, meaning that you could have them equipped with an RPG or an EMP rifle to give your vehicle even more tank busting power, while still being able to absolutely wreck pretty much any infantry squad. You just have to be aware of enemy vehicles or squads that have tank killing power of their own, and make sure you prioritize taking them out first, or you may lose both your carrier and its infantry escort, costing you a bunch of firepower and flexibility mid-mission. Now for the late game builds. The late game tanks and walkers really just build on the ones we talked about for the mid game, but add things like the long barrel tank gun, autocannons on walkers, and replacing the light troop carrier with the IFV for better survivability. Loading up the IFV with a long barrel tank gun and grenade launcher gives you a pretty powerful platform to take on just about any battlefield threat you find. My favorite late game build right now though is a medium walker with an autocannon equipped on each arm. When you equip the same weapon in both slots, they will fire together, creating an absolute firestorm whenever you attack. Dual autocannons will shred through both infantry and everything but the heaviest vehicles, making for a good all-arounder weapons platform. Of course, doing this with rocket launchers and laser lances can be a blast too. However, these two combinations are overkill for pretty much everything, but you can never have too much overkill. Speaking of laser lances, even in the late game, these are still viable options, mainly because they do not require ammo. Using energy weapons on your vehicles can save you the headache of running out of ammo if you can manage the slight downgrade in power. Now, we haven't discussed vehicle equipment yet, so let's touch on that too. My favorites that I use pretty much on all my builds are some combination of the advanced sensors for view and detection range, the vehicle ammo case, the camo net to increase concealment, and the smoke launcher. There are of course options for armor, anti-personnel mines, canister shot for infantry that gets too close, and even a missile for light anti-hardware duties, but I find that most of these are fairly useless in the current build of the game. Generally, if you use good tactics and don't overextend with your vehicles, the armor isn't really needed. Then for the anti-infantry options, these are all very short range, and if you let an enemy infantry get that close, you probably should have already destroyed them a turn or two ago anyway. Finally, the missile only really makes sense if you're using something like the light walker or ATV for anti-infantry duties, and need something with more kick in case an enemy vehicle rolls up, but most of the time you'll be better off just using a small weapons team with a machine gun instead, as it's both cheaper and more flexible as a suppression tool. The biggest takeaway I have for equipment would be to get the vehicle ammo case as soon as you can. Especially in the early game, this will help you get a lot more out of your vehicle's guns. Of course, don't forget that you can always just run enemies over if you do run out of ammo. So no, there's no OP destroy everything and make the game easy tank, but that wouldn't be any fun either. However, there are multiple build options to try at every point in the game, and almost any of them, used correctly, will completely dominate any threat you find on the battlefield. So experiment, try new things, and let me know your favorite tank and walker builds and strategies in the comments. Then like and subscribe to help me continue making videos on tactics and strategy games. As always, thank you so much for watching, have a great day, and keep on gaming.